and if the pile's next to the chipper, you winch it 200 feet to the chipper, and you're really saving your workforce's backs, man. Because really that's what we do, is we're constantly bending over, cutting, pulling, all of that. By the time you reach 40, 45 years old, you keep doing that, you're done. You know, how many of you guys have seen people in this agency walking like this by the time they retire? Hopefully something like this will save a little bit of that. And then this is the type of machine that's working up on Laguna right now. Self-feeding poultry chipper. And there's a benefit to that. I mean, that's purely mechanized treatment. The only thing that had to happen was that WCF employees, maybe somebody you sitting in this room, went up there to dump the trees for the contractor to come in and do that. The only thing you need with that is an excavator with a grapple staging everything, so you don't have to drive this all over the place and tear up the soil. And here's your tub grinder. It's limited. You have to bring everything to the machine. It sits stationary. It's very expensive, very cumbersome, and you have it. Did you have experience up north with seeing this? Just the cogen?
Yeah, the limited use of cogens with them shutting down and not being able to continue to feed them.
Yeah. This usually goes hand in hand with areas that bring in a mobile cogen plant. Have any of you heard of a cogen at all? So it's something that really came out within the last probably 15 years. You know, we have all of our policy is pushing towards green, renewable energy. You hear words like sustainable, the buzzwords, renewable, this, that, and the other thing. Well, these inventions are the brainchilds of trying to follow that market where the political environment is going. The machines change because of the way policy changes. So in the private sector, they're always going to try to find ways to get those contracts to meet that standard within the Nico requirements, and this is one of them, right here. But it's very cumbersome, it's very expensive. It's not very practical in a sense to bring all of your material, say, off the Palomar and the Descanso district to a centralized location for this thing to grind up. Then what do you do with the chips afterwards? What do you do with them? You know, you have to haul them somewhere. Hopefully somebody will buy it in a niche market under a stewardship.
Yeah, we had a guy come and purchase all our chips to dye them for landscaping.
Yeah.
We had one of those working up on Fry Creek, and it was cool to see it work, but what it created a nightmare for when we went in and tried to burn, because it created like 5 feet of chip depth.
Yep.
So it took, I want to say it took when the fire went through, it took maybe a whole week and countless water tenders getting in there to move the chips back, because it was impossible to put it out.
And so what's that doing to your soils? The organic layer in your soil?
Yeah,
if you light it up, it's cooking it.
Yeah.
And then you have your crushers and choppers like what you mentioned over here.
Yep.
And those are definitely passive devices. And then your air curtain burner incinerator. This is actually pretty brilliant. I like the fact that this thing's mobile and that you could actually take it right to the job site. But you're not going to get a lot of production in there. But really what you're going to be doing is in those areas, say around a community where you have high density homes. And you have a very small area, but you have a lot of debris, bring it there and feed it. And also the way that the air blows through there, your emissions are way down. So that may be a way to where one engine module could actually run the thing. And your bang for your buck, you know, is kind of moderate and it's still effective. And you could actually build one of these at home. It's not going to be this pretty. but I'm working on one. It looks so white trash, but it works. And then here's your chaining. That's pretty barbaric, man. Look at that. You just put a chain between two dozers and you're just destroying everything. And what happens there is that leaves a bunch of biomass that needs to be burned later. And sometimes it's never burned. Try doing a mobile attack and now you're going through, you're trying to get it into a chain and you're just like, no, it doesn't work. You're going to puncture a tire and you're not going to have enough water. So, we're going to take a break. So, we're going to take a break. What time did Fillmore say lunch was?
11:30.
Whatever you wanted to be.
So, you have an option. You could go to lunch, say in 5 minutes, or we could wait till 11:30 and talk about nonsense, or we can start the next unit. It's up to you. What do you want to do? Okay, I'm not getting asked. You want me to make an executive decision?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get started in the next unit. Just the introduction, 5 minutes, then go to lunch.
Boom.
Really cheap?
Shut up.
All right. What?
It's like a terrible place to do any kind of mechanical treatment.
This is actually, all the pictures in here is the NRCS contracts going on in my community right now on private land. It's like the Wild West of fuels treatments. You don't have a job inspector coming in. The only thing we had was a restriction on work in accordance to nesting season and also following PAL levels. Other than that, it's like the landowner doesn't even know what they want, so basically we were putting in our own landscape design. And I had to actually modify it a bit because the laid off Forest Service people were doing this to the manzanita trees. Hey, don't lollipop the trees, man. That's going to kill them eventually, or it looks ugly. Look at that. It's terrible. So that's whole tree chip, or that's chipping right there, and there was a mastication component to that. But there's a perfect example of an area where a track chipper with handwork and winch works. What's that?
That's a manzanita kills it?
It can, eventually.
Because I've done that.
It can.
No.
It's not that it will. It can under drought conditions. It gets rain, it's fine. I've noticed. So, here's the objectives. We're going to determine the difference in fuels characteristics. We're going to know which techniques are appropriate per fuel type. You're going to understand the difference between pure mechanized versus mechanical treatment, mainly when to apply it. So understand when to apply a multiple technical approach. A contractor that can do a multiple technical approach is usually a really good contractor that understands one. So understanding private contractors, and then define what activity fuels are and how to mitigate them. So we already went into that, but this kind of goes into it a little bit further because you do really create activity fuel. So having said that, how long has Fillmore been giving you for lunch?
2 hours.
Dude, skip a beat. 45 minutes. Oh, 45.
I was expecting an answer like that out of somebody, so you had to be the wise apple in the room. So hour, so be back at what, noon?
Back in noon, high noon.
2 hours.
Blue card in there.
That was my question.
Treatments are going to be multiple type treatments in the same area. So we're going to get right into it, the fuel's characteristics. So your fuel type determines the method of treatment options. For example, Is your fuel bed that you're trying to treat, is it a timber component? Is it a brush component? Or is it range? And that definitely is determined by the geographic region. We don't do much range work here anymore, especially our grazing allotments on the southern forest have pretty much gone bye-bye. So then it brings question, is that fuel contiguous? Is it like just a example like a chamise field, and that's really nothing but chamise? Or juniper, there's another one where it's just juniper's taking over the rangeland. Or what's kind of, I don't know, unique to this area, that ceanothus that's coming back in. You know, is that ceanothus, so is that a bad thing coming back in after the cedar fire? Where it's just taking over and becoming a monoculture? I don't know. I can tell you, it might be just the natural scheme of fire succession around here. It
There's
could be.
different viewpoints too. Like, certain people like things better versus others.
Yeah.
Different things.
But what's that do as an activity fuel, right? It's hard to get rid of. It's hard to mitigate. It's very difficult, if that's the objective. So then, or are you in an area with multiple species? I could guarantee you right here that the Cleveland National Forest has probably all of the major 14 types of ecosystems, other than probably your low desert. But you might, depending on, I don't know how far the forest boundary goes towards Ocotillo Wells and all of that, or towards the desert floor down there in Borrego. Is it mixed chaparral? There's a lot of mixed chaparral here, especially the old growth stuff. Mixed conifer. The Cleveland is so unique, and it has so many niche cultures on it in conifer that it blows my mind. Old growth chaparral and oak woodlands, you have a lot of that. You have oak savanna, several different species of oak, your main canyon live oak and your coast live oak here. And I think, I don't know, the Cleveland, especially on this side of the 15 freeway, to me is just very beautiful and unique. It's the only place in Southern California then where you have like a redwood type species of tree like this. I don't know. So that's pretty cool. So these are just examples of how you can mitigate, say, a timber type of fuel. So here's your type of mechanized treatment options. You have your machines you can use, your timber harvesters, feller bunchers, yarders, chainsaws, skidders, yoders, log hauling trucks. So most of these are for fuel removal. There is an actual product that leaves the site, the main bowl of the tree, the woody biomass is going away, which still leaves residual fuels left over, right? And depending on what you want, your results are going to vary. And I did put some benefits in there. So you do generate timber sale revenue. It's not much. So you have the removal of bulls. It does stimulate a local economy if the infrastructure is there to support it. You can place restrictions on tree removal, either by species, by size, or how much basal area you want removed. You can target a tree species and leave others. And there's measurable board footage. The reason I put in measurable board footage, this is economy driven. People that harvest trees are in the business of making money. If they can't get board footage out of your contracts or your timber sales, they're not going to want to touch them. So here's your negative impacts. Social acceptance. Logging has had a really bad rap since about the mid-1960s with the environmental movement. So people hear the word logging and all of a sudden it's bad. So you'll have your groups in there that just totally, it doesn't matter what the activity is, it's all bad. It requires a road system. So you have to have the road systems engineered for these logging trucks, for semi-trucks to be in place. It leaves large residue because there really isn't much of a market for all the branches and stuff left behind. There's a need for landings and log decks, which most usually are pushed in by equipment, and they need to be rehabbed. They usually require re-entry to mitigate activity fuels, and especially during the drought years, you may transport bark beetles, and kind of go on a little side tangent on that. So if we continue to receive this El Nino rain, maybe it's just this year, maybe a couple years, do you think it's going to support the spread of, say, a bark beetle, or do you think it's going to reduce the spread?
Reduce.
Why?
Because the tree will be healthier if it can drink in more water to support its bark.
Exactly. Exactly. So, another example to treat timber, if you're trying to reduce timber, is whole tree chipping, like what's going on Mount Laguna right now. So there are mechanized and mechanical options. Obviously, the mechanized is truly, except it's modified, so it's actually a mechanical treatment. WCF employees went in and dumped the trees, and now the contractor's going in, yarding those trees, and now they're putting them through whole tree chippers, displacing the chips on the ground. And so they're using excavators with articulating grapples up there, self-loading tree chippers, self-propelled track chippers. One winter when I was still working in Region 4, when I got laid off, I did work a contract down on Laguna, and we used just the track chipper with hand crews. So that was pretty effective, but we were limited to 14 inches in size, so we did have some stuff left over. Tow behind chippers, kind of a pain, and crews with chainsaws performing manual labor. So here's the results. Here's your benefit. It's socially acceptable. Why? Do you think that this would be more socially acceptable than mine?
Probably less of a footprint left. It's going to be smaller diameter, so maybe too big ears.
Yeah, there's less of a footprint, but kind of go beyond that. Kind of think politically speaking.
Someone's not profiting off of it.
Yeah.
Idea of someone, it's just good for the environment.
Yeah, they're not quote unquote raping the land, right? People now, this day and age, have a misconception that logging equals clear cutting. Yeah, the sins of the past are still with us, of what, in the industry they have done.
Question.
Hmm?
When you're done, I have a question.
No, you could ask now.
I may be jumping ahead, but NTRS, now do they?
NRCS.
NRCS. They work with your committees, your fire safe councils?
No.
They don't? I thought they did in Ottawa.
Sure,
They,
CDs that are supposed to.
the NRCS will work with somebody in a fire safe council just to allot grant money. But they don't, so I guess in a sense they do, but they don't actively go out to look for the acreage to throw the money at. That's on the fire safe council. NRCS will say, okay, there's a project, it's approved, here's your money. That's kind of what I'm doing in my community right now. And right now there's a big pot until 2017. They can't throw it away fast enough. It's kind of nice. It rearranges the fuel for more manageable treatment options. So after this whole tree chipping on Laguna, you're going to come in and burn, right? That's what happened with the last one. Do the whole tree chipping, then do a broadcast understory burn. And I'm kind of interested to go back up there and see what the mortality rate is on those trees with that burn, even with that reduction. The rehab occurs with progression or soil stabilization. So basically what we've done is we go in an area with the machine to chip these jobs. The tracks and stuff that we leave in place will go back through kind of take the equipment, smooth it out, and then we blow the chips right over the top of it, and it stabilizes the soil. So as you go, you rehab. It's mechanized, so it's really cost effective, and it reduces the time of treatment. So here's your negative impacts. There's a need to chip immediately after cutting, especially in timber. I know a couple of you guys understand why. Does anybody know why? You need to cut, you need to chip as soon as possible after you cut your conifer species. Bueller? Anyone? Bueller?
Does the wood get too hard for the shears?
No.
From the mud?
No.
Kids are muding.
There you go. It creates a breeding ground for your insects like the bark beetle. Because that cambium layer in the tree still has moisture in it, and now that tree on its side is really susceptible and they just go right to it. It's like a vacant house, you know, in a homeless area. Here we go. It can leave a heavy woody residue or an activity fuel. It can leave activity fuel depending on the depth. You get fire established in something that's more than 4 inches thick. If a fire does get in there, what happens to those soil temperatures with that chip layer on top of the 100 years of duff? It just cooks your soil.
Duration of the fire is
Yeah, it might be low intensity, but it's long duration. Residue may need RX fire. And it may limit the types of contractors to the ones with the capability. So that's just basically in a timber type. In a brush field model, you know, the equipment necessary to do the treatment is definitely going to vary. Not many machines that are out there can do it all. You have to have a combination of machines or a combination of treatments to treat an area. So your field model is going to dictate the type of machinery and the type of treatment that you're going to do. So for example, in a contiguous brush field model, appropriate treatment options may be, and this isn't the end-all be-all right here, but these are just suggestions. Mastication on chamise, pinyon juniper, heavy dead down timber or monoculture. And the reason for that is that everything pretty much is the same. You can use the same treatment on it. You know, the landscape design will dictate which areas you go through, but you can get away with doing this. You can crush it and burn it later, which some of you have seen, or at least understand it. You can mow it, like in the southern rough, or flat ground reprod or reproduction. Rotary discs, which work in pinyon and juniper, or timber under 30 feet in height. Harrowing in the basin sage, or chaining. So basically, those are types of treatments that you can use in monoculture that are effective, but most of these require a follow-up treatment afterwards, you know, pretty usually RX fire. Except for the case where you're masticating in chamise, where you may want to leave the woody residue, because in like a continuous field bed, like on the near El Paraiso, on the is that what district is that? I forgot. Tribuco district.
We call it the turd.
The turd. Awesome. Thank you for that. You made my day. You have a lot of brush fields over there that are contiguous, that are a monoculture over there, just because of the fire history that has been in the area. Of course, I know you have Oak Canyon stuff. You have very little conifer on that district, but you do have areas where you masticate. How many of you notice that in those pure brush fields, how much grass is growing underneath them? How much stuff is underneath them? Not much, right? Or am I wrong?
It depends on the time of year, but yeah, we do get a grass component during the spring, but no, it's not a whole lot.
Yeah, so what do you think happens if you remove that, just remove it, and you let that soil explode? So you get a lot of precipitation on the coastal range. So the treatment might be better if you just masticate it and turn that biomass or that woody residue into the soil to help the soil stabilization. So that may be a more appropriate choice in regards to a soils aspect. Crushing, you could burn it later. Okay, never mind, I had a brain freeze there. So, on the Cleveland or even on the San Bernardino, every place that we have is a transition zone. You go 500 feet in elevation, you're going to go from a grassland, oak savanna, coastal sage shrub community to a oak savanna chaparral community. Then you go on the other side, on the north facing slope, and you might be into an old growth chaparral community. And then within that 1 mile, you gain elevation 1,000 feet. Now you're in a timber component mixed in with oaks. So everything in Southern California is more or less like this in a lot of areas. So I think all of the Cleveland is a transition area. That's why it's pretty unique. So in your mixed species transition areas, a lot of selective thinning happens, and you do targeted treatment. Its treatment is targeted for this specific area. You leave a lot of species. You may have a desired species that you want to leave in place, whether it be from a Forest Service, forest landscape aspect, or from a wildlife aspect, or maybe it just makes the public happy. Treatment may be designed to promote a specific species. Has any of you worked in an area other than Southern California? What species, for example, can you think of where you would want to release something? You get rid of one thing so that something else can grow. Somebody said sequoia. Bingo. The sequoias are thriving. They are thriving more now than they were 100 years ago. Of course, we quit cutting them down for lumber. Why is that?
Because of fires?
Yeah, but
Prescribed or
yes, the prescribed fire. The Sequoia National Park has figured it out. At least it seems like they have. Their giant sequoias, even their big ones, are growing even bigger at a faster rate than they were, say, 30, 40 years ago. And it's because they've gotten rid of a lot of the other species in order to promote that species. And I've seen it, like, for example, in aspen, where you get rid of the fir trees, the white fir and the blue spruce, to open up ground where the soil temperatures get hotter from the sunlight, and now the aspens like it, and now they're growing. Pardon?
They were doing that in the Black Hills, North Dakota, South Dakota, anywhere out there. They had certain projects where they were cutting down everything else but the aspen, to let the aspen take the hold again.
Yeah, I understand. That white fir and that blue spruce is kind of like, it seems like it's the tumbleweed of the high elevation. It just takes over. And we've really, since we've started extinguishing fire, we've created a fuel loading situation that it's difficult to manage. The fuel type or species of the fuel will influence the type of treatment, which it really does. Our treatments are fuel driven, so the type of fuel will determine or influence what treatment you put in there. Multiple species will almost always determine multiple treatment applications. Does that make sense? If you have multiple species, usually, almost always, you have to do several different treatment options in one area. And then, of course, I'm going to just see multiple technical approach. So these pictures were taken on my property for NRCS contracts right here. It's old growth chaparral, fire history there. There is some. I find remnants of a fire that happened, I don't know when. I've read old newspaper clippings and stuff like that that vaguely references a fire in 1898.
Wow.
So I do still see manzanita with charcoal on it and stuff like that, but other than that, there's been no fire history in there. And this is an area I have seen since I was born. So 40 years I've seen different things in here, and I've actually noticed in the areas where there were chamise that was completely contiguous, the drought killed it off, and now it's exposed to grass. It's so weird, it just did it on its own. But we do have fuel treatments going on behind all of the structures in there because it's mainly for community defense. But we're also creating better wildlife habitat. You know, the last 2 years, I've seen more deer in there than I have seen, you know, my entire life. Maybe it's because it's opened up and I could actually see them. They may have been there already, but hunting's gotten really good. So a mechanized, pure mechanized treatment still utilize people. We already got into this. And a multiple technical approach can still be successful with pure mechanized options. So you could have maybe 1 or 2 treatment options. It's still a multiple technical approach without putting individuals on the ground. Can anybody think of any examples of that? From what you've seen. Fillmore's got a brilliant program down here when it comes to fuels, and I know he utilizes some of this, or at least has influence in the design on some of them.
Like mastication.
Okay, there's one in conjunction with what? Pure machine.
Yeah, the incinerator.
Yeah. With the incinerator, I guess.
Yeah.
If you're using a skid steer to either masticate it first and then pick up all the debris and then put it in the incinerator.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you put the chips in the incinerator with this machine?
I've never used the incinerator, I'm not sure.
I hope you guys get to do it. You can probably barbecue hamburgers and hot dogs while you're using it. So mechanized treatments utilize machines only. Examples are pure mastication, poultry chipping, harrowing, chaining, timber harvest, mowing. However, all of our fuel types down here usually need a multiple technical approach. So this here has a combination of both. You can see the mastication in the brush. That was a contiguous area that was made of mostly chamise, but you notice our leaf species here was the manzanita. In this area, the desired species was to leave them. And notice they haven't really been limbed up, they've just been masticated around, so they kind of exist in their natural state. So multiple technical approach, it's a combination of treatment options may be the most appropriate for many fuel hazard reduction projects. The objective of the treatment and the desired end state will determine how many technical approaches need to be utilized. For example, how many have heard feel-good statements like this, or read feel-good statements? Implementing hazardous fuels treatment for community protection, containing multiple species in varying terrain while maintaining a visually appealing landscape and improving wildlife habitat. How many objectives are there already in that fuels treatment?
Quite a bit.
Five. So my question is this: potentially how many types of treatment may need to happen within one project area? Off the top of your head? Could be 5. It could be 1. Could be more. Just depends. More equals more expensive. So, multiple technical approaches are usually performed where conceived necessity exists to implement a fuels treatment. The most common is community protection. So we are doing fuels treatments. Are they necessary, or do we think they're necessary?
Both.
Yeah, both. we think they're necessary. Is it our job to protect houses on private land
Go for it.
in accordance to our fuels treatment? Okay, look at our land management plan. One of our objectives in our land management plan is to provide community protection. And if that community, or if those houses come within or are very adjacent to our administered lands, according to our land management plan, we do. That's why WHF pays for it. But, so it's a conceived necessity that we have to do it. For example, our fuel break system around Idlewild. The fuel break system down below El Carrizo, in that community. You got houses dotted right in the middle of federally administered lands. So that's why there's fuels treatments going on there. So there's a conceived necessity to do it. And we can't control where people build houses. They build houses in the most messed up places, in chimneys. They got a good view. Oh, I got a great view. Well, during a wildland fire, your house is gone, man, if you don't do the treatment around it, and that's still not a guarantee. So, an example of a multiple technical approach. So I'm looking in, this is kind of going into a scope of work and under a contract. Anybody that has run a masticator on the federal side under WCF probably has seen something like this. At least, if you haven't read it, you've probably heard it verbally. Masticate on 35% slope or less in less rocky terrain and contiguous chemise component adjacent to proposed broadcast RX unit. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand why you would want to do that? Okay, let's just get it in now. Cut and pile under timber canopy and burn piles. Cut and chip near structures and improvements in steep rocky terrain. Winching okay in known arc sites. Broadcast burn timber understory litter and activity fuel within the same fuels treatment area. So there are 4 components to a multiple technical approach. So, and this could happen within one treatment area or just be exclusive to a portion of your entire treatment area. So here's some rules to determine multiple technical approach may be necessary. So you want to preserve the desired species. You want to leave the artifacts alone. Man, don't roll the heavy equipment down a hill. I've seen it happen. I've seen excavators tip over. They're a pain to clean up. Don't lollipop the trees, man. Hey, I've done it too. You don't use charged.
I did see that dude with Sequoia once.
Oh, yeah?
Well, that's the hazard reduction around houses.
Yeah, it was my.
But here's the thing.
Look at the tree. It said make it look nice, so
Yeah, exactly.
they said park settings.
Yeah, for Super Mario Brothers, right?
But
But the thing is, limbing, you may, yeah, definitely have to, at times, have to limb up something, but the objective is to break up the fuels, right? If it's for fire. That always doesn't mean that on an individual tree that's all cleared, you have to limb it up. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of those ladder fuels because those horizontal fuels are gone. So you don't always have to do it. Don't tear up the highly erosive soil. Don't leave shredded brush in place. I'm not talking about what's left over from like a mastication. I'm talking about when you were leaving an island in a mastication unit and the masticator only shreds up like half of a bush along a flag line. So half of this bush looks natural, now the other half is shredded to hell. We've all seen it. That's where you might have to go in there with, you know, with the hand crew, with the chainsaw, just cut it, throw it into the mastication unit, the machine comes in and grinds it. Leave the bird nests alone, if you can. It's never good to blow wood debris through the home. I've seen it done, if you're working in an area where there are homes. It's, yeah, the homeowner doesn't like it at all when we got chunks of manzanita blowing through their wall into their living room. Leave the rocks in place, reduce the dust. Burning isn't an option, at least for now. My fire intensity may be too hot. Remember that wood chips don't support activity for bark beetles or gold spotted oak borer, things like that. There's just not enough for them to eat, not enough places for them to breed in wood chips. And winching is better than dragging by hand and save the workers' backs. I'm a huge proponent, if you're going to do a mechanized treatment or mechanical treatment, if you have the option, use the machinery, you get a lot more done, and by the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month, your workforce, whether it be WCF employees or private contractors, they're still going to be able to stand up or not be aching when they go to bed at night. So, your multiple technical approaches to meet Nico requirements. So usually, Nico requirements require multiple technical approach, whether it be cultural resources that you're trying to protect soil, or your hydrology, botany concerns, your biology. You may have an endangered species in the area, like the Caspo, California spotted owl. There may be public interest. They live in this pristine community, and they want it left natural. Oh, now you're raping the land around my house, and it doesn't look good anymore. It doesn't look nice. You may have smoke regulations. You may be in a riparian concern area where you can't take heavy equipment in there. And multiple technical approaches can exist in an entire treatment unit, or it can be specific to an isolated area of the treatment unit. So it all determines, it's all based off of what the fuel is doing and what your objective is. Am I making any sense here? And the thing of it is, we do it already. If you work out in the field and do field work, you're already doing this. When you first start in your career, you may not even know why. But after a while, you understand why. But I guarantee you, there's times where you've gone, why am I doing this? Why are we dragging brush 200 feet up this slope? Oh. So this is my little tangent here. I'm going to read this, and this is why you guys are sitting in this leadership curriculum, because of this. There's a disconnect between implementation and planning in most geographic areas. The implementation crews are composed of WCF employees or contractors. CORs and job inspectors, I'm not saying in all cases, but usually have an education with little to no ground experience. Implementation crews usually have little to no academic background with tons of hands-on experience. So in our job, you usually start two ways. You start as a firefighter or on a fuels crew or something like that, using a chainsaw. You like being outdoors. And college was never an option, or could have been, but you had no interest. I certainly didn't. Now, my version of being in hell was more classwork. But in this job, you either have your hands on the dirty work, or you have your nose behind a computer to write fuels planning. If you learn how to do both, you'll be able to write solid contracts, scopes of work, and communicate with the workforce. Yeah, there is a huge disconnect. So if you learn how to do both, and that's probably one of the reasons why you're here, is you won't insult the intelligence of the workforce or the contractor if you can be built in common sense forestry, because the people on the ground usually understand what common sense forestry is. They don't come from an academic background. And this is kind of parallels any place in any workforce in any industry. People with the hands-on experience know how to get it done on the ground, but they understand nothing about NEPA. NEPA is a four-letter word, right? If you're working on ground, if you've never been exposed to it, it's something you go, oh, I don't want to know anything about that. It's not that difficult once you understand it. But it is a requirement for us because of our EPA requirements. So this is a tip for the COR, the job inspector, right here. You want to weed out bad contractors and you want to support good contractors. Here's what good contractors will do. You're going to show up to the job. I've seen many contractors not even show up at all and default on the contract. That's not good business. A good contractor is going to have an understanding of forest ecology and effects of treatment. Where do they get that from usually, a private contractor in this industry? Do they get it from college? Where do they get it? Where does it start?
Hands-on.
Huh?
Hands-on?
Hands-on. Usually they were former employees of an agency, a forest management agency, whether it be Forest Service, BLM, Park Service, whatever. And then they get into the private contracting world because the grass is greener on the other side.
More
Or they,
money?
huh?
More money, maybe?
Maybe more money, not always. It all depends on how good they are. A good contractor will have or either sub out necessary equipment for the job. Now this is where I'm going to contradict Fillmore. That's right, Fillmore, I'm going to contradict you. They say let the contractors get creative. In a certain sense you have to. But what if they have no experience and don't understand what they're doing to get creative? Is that creativity going to damage or be in breach of contract? Or is it going to provide a solution to a problem to meet a scope of work? Yeah. A good contractor will usually bid in accordance to actual cost of doing business and not have the lowest bid. Have you ever heard the term cheaper is better? Well, we have a tendency in this agency, one of our objectives is to spend the taxpayer money wisely, right? So we're going to go with the low bid. To me, low bid usually means non-performance of work in a contract because they don't understand the cost of doing business. And then what they're going to do is some of these other things. Good contractor will show up on time. A good contractor will finish on time. A good contractor will rehab as they go. And they definitely not usually won't ask for a job extension. You know what a job extension is, anyone?
Ask them all the time.
Exactly. Do we as WCF employees get our projects done on time? Be honest. Do we get our fuel breaks done if we have to go out and cut and pile them and we have miles to cut? Do we
I
get
don't
to?
know how many times somebody changes the objective.
There we go.
Priorities.
And what workforce available? Who is at work at the time? They won't hire non-documented employees. They pay workman's comp. They have good insurance. And they have maintained equipment. When you're doing mechanized treatment, equipment breakdowns are basically the death blow to your business. Because if your equipment's broken down, you're not producing. Good contractors, they can read and implement a scope of work. They can determine when it's not a good time to put equipment on the ground. For example, last week after all these rainstorms, they have to let that soil set up for a few more days or for a few days before they can get back out there, otherwise they're going to tear it up. And now they're going to be in breach of their contract because they have a really large erosion factor.
Do you incorporate the weather into the contracts as far as rain, delaying,
You can, if it's a short-term contract and you basically see what's coming down the pipe. You might have a service contract that's $2,500 and below. How many people have paid for a service with their government purchase card $2,500 and below? Any service. That's still a contract, right? Well, sometimes you might have a tree removal contract, $2,500 and below. Oh, we'll get it done within a week. Well, it's going to be snowing all that week. So that's a small example, a small scale. But on your large contracts, you really can't put the weather, use the weather as part of your bid. But the contracting officer can write in flexibility to put an extension on in the event of inclement weather for this many days, cumulative days. So that's up to the COR to understand those things and write into that contract. A good contractor will make recommendations for coordinating with WCF employees. Does that make any sense? How about those of you, if you went up there to cut those trees down up on Mount Laguna, the timing before that contractor came in there to chip those up before it came a hotbed for bark beetles. I've seen contracts when it was really hot and heavy after the bug kill up there, where WCF employees were burning immediately after the private contractor was piling with equipment. You were there in those days, weren't you, Sal? You don't remember that? Because most private contractors won't want to carry the liability insurance to they'll give advance notice of job progress. A good contractor will provide alternative solutions for problem areas. A good contractor will clean up their messes. I've seen bad contractors do oil changes and try to bury it under the ground. They will identify and report sensitive resources when recognized, and I don't know how many times I've been with a private contractor where we come into an area of, say, cultural resources, and the Forest Service knew nothing about them. I'll stop, call in the job inspector and get a specialist out here. A good contractor will intimidate the COR or the job inspector with experienced and common sense solutions in an intelligent way. If a contractor or even somebody on the ground seems to know more about forestry than you do, go with it, because you will be happy with the end result. And here's what bad private contractors, this is what they'll do. They'll underbid the job. They're going to ask for multiple extensions. They're going to hire non-documented employees. They don't pay workman's comp and are underinsured. They have poorly maintained or the wrong equipment, and they'll cheat the work area boundary. You know what cheating the work area boundary is? How easy is it to untie and move a piece of flagging? I'm betting some of you in this room have done that as a WCF employee in an area that was really difficult to get into. I know there are some in this room who've done that.
I don't untie it, I just rip it down.
You could have, they put it at the bottom.
Thank you for your honesty. They don't understand forest ecology. These, for example, these construction crews coming in because the market is terrible in the construction arena, but they have equipment and they think they're going to get a contract. But they had the lowest bid on the job, and now they have the contract. Now what? They can't identify, or they'll hide sensitive areas. For example, they go into an area, and now they've destroyed cultural resources, and they think they're going to be in trouble because now they're going to breach a contract. Now they're covering up their tracks. Or they don't even know what they're looking at, and they destroy it anyway because they don't even know, what they're looking at when they see it. They won't think of rehab until told to do it. They will ask for numerous advances on payments with poor performance. So it's not uncommon for a contractor, especially if they have crews working on the ground, to ask for an advance or a partial payment of that contract, because you still have to pay those employee wages. You still have to pay for maintenance on machines. You still have to pay for fuel. So hopefully the contract or the COR will pay that contractor in installments. They do a quarter of the work, they get paid a quarter of the sum of that contract. Also, they will have non-justified arguments with the inspectors. Is anybody in here an inspector, by the way? Have you had a non-justified argument with a private contractor?
No, I've had pretty good luck with contractors.
Well, I know the contractors you're dealing with, and you're dealing with some fine ones right now.
I work up on the Plumas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Bad contractors will not hire subs and will, quote, wing it. This is where I will contradict you, Mr. Fillmore. But this is where the contractors get creative. Oh man, I've seen some really, really awful things happen when they get creative. But I've seen some good things happen too. A bad contractor will not pay their subs. They will lie about their capabilities to get contract awards. They will not calculate the cost of doing business, such as the price of fuel and what the price of fuel is doing. Right now, the price of fuel is great. But if you're using a machine that will eat up 8 gallons of diesel in an hour, now that your diesel costs what it costs now, but what if it costs $4 a gallon? Is that going to be a huge cost difference in your profit margin down the road? Huge difference. And I wish the CORs would understand that. Hey, the fuel prices are high, so maybe the dollar amount should be a little bit high, but agency COR's objective isn't to spend money, it's to save money, right? And a bad contractor will intimidate the COR or job inspector with idiocy and hostility to justify poor work in an irrational way. Or that natural human tendency to be self-defensive. Anybody need a break? It's been basically 50 minutes. How's everybody doing? Everybody's doing good? So am I putting you to sleep yet?
5 minutes.
All right, how about we take a break and then be back at 10 after. Be back at 10 after.
Ooh, generous.
You're still recording, right?
So, this section has to deal with activity fuels. So, look at the ground in this picture at their feet. You have the activity fuels in place, right here. This was multiple species in steep terrain and rocky terrain. The capabilities of this machine is a track chipper. Look at where it's sitting. It brought the chipper to the material for the most part. And this right here is the winch. So all we'll do is come in to an area that needs to be cut. We just lay a nylon rope choker on the ground, lay the brush on top of it, cinch it up, hook that winch onto it, and we're pulling it uphill or downhill, straight to the machine. Just lay the choker right on the ground, lay your brush on top of it, cinch it up, hook it up, it's gone. What's that doing to their backs? Is it saving them? What's that doing up here mentally to their morale when they have to go on these projects day in and day out?
Keeping it up, because knowing that you guys got good equipment, and I know you care about your workforce,
Yeah.
and you think it's smarter than harder.
The hardest thing to do is break the habits of us as WCF employees to quit pulling that brush. Because we do it all the time. We're used to pulling, throwing, pulling, throwing. Yeah, some of that has to be done. But once they figure out that, oh my gosh, this is great. This machine is doing it for me. The production rate goes up. Big time. I'd say probably 5 times goes up. So, activity fuels after treatment. So, activity fuels will exist after the treatments. These activity fuels can increase fire intensity and behavior for a short term, and a follow-up treatment may be necessary to mitigate these fuels. So, here's kind of three main types of activity fuels. So you have your woody residue biomass. It's just whatever's left over from your mastication and chipping. And we've kind of beat that horse. Disturbed area or invasive species. Does anybody understand what a disturbed area fuel is? We mentioned a
Track
disturbed area
equipment.
fuel.
Tracked equipment's gone around, moved it around a little bit.
Okay, that's a disturbance. How about a disturbed area fuel? Disturbed areas could be burn areas. It could be areas that have been opened up due to equipment activity or opened up due to hand treatment activity or even animal activity if it's grazing and they just overgraze an area. Things will come back to replace it. It's not necessarily the same species that you removed. So a good example of a disturbed area fuel is, how many familiar with Yerba Santa? It's a broadleaf, very light tomentose leaf, kind of furry plant. Leaves about this big, about that wide, very light green, a little bit lighter than our Forest Service vehicles. Well, that stuff comes back with a vengeance in a disturbed area. It loves disturbed area. I think it's going for world domination in those areas, in some places. Your coastal sage shrub communities have disturbed area species that thrives over another. Buckwheat, not so much. We're trying to save that stuff. It's going away because of urban sprawl, but the Yerba Santa and brittlebush and other stuff like that, they love areas that have been turned over by equipment or where fires come through. And then, of course, the activity fuel is reproduction or stored seed bank from sprouting. Some of these seeds can be in the ground for decades, if not a century. These seeds are just sitting there waiting to be germinated. It takes a specific condition for it to germinate. So we burn it, we graze it, we herbicide it, we perform a reentry, we haul it away. But how about the funding for it? We plan for the initial treatment, but do we ever plan for the funding for the reentry to maintain that treatment? We lose our treatments constantly because the process of maintaining that treatment or that desired end result isn't thought of until it grows back. It's like Pine Cove Fuel Break in Ottawa. That treatment was done over 10 years ago. It's growing back, and now the community, they're a very savvy fire safe council community. They're putting pressure on the agency to do a reentry on it. So WCF employees, we don't have enough to retreat it, so it's going to go out to private contract. Doing nothing can be an option, depends on the desired end state. Can anybody think of an example where doing nothing to a fuels treatment to maintain it would be an option? Don't think of community protection, think of things like range and maybe you're releasing species. So you go and do your treatment, you do your mastication, and that's it, and you walk away.
If you're wanting to open up habitat for wildlife movement.
Yeah. Wildlife habitat improvement's a good one. Or you want to make sure that the soil is stabilized. Or how about this? Reducing your fire behavior, or your fuels, in your live fuels to a younger state within the first 10 years. The fire really doesn't like it because there's not really a bunch of dead woody biomass contained within that live fuel.
You're reducing your fuel loading so you can catch the fire if it burns with less intensity.
Yeah, that's kind of the objective. That's kind of some of the landscape design that's written to a lot of our projects. So activity fuels or lack of. So activity fuels are not only limited to the flora, dead and down fuels open areas invite other activities. For example, activity fuel can open up to insect activity. It can open it up to invasive species activities, which are either direct or indirect. Direct, we put them there because of our direct actions. Indirect, well, you have people now putting mountain bike trails through your fuels treatment because that seems to be the thing to do for recreation this day and age. And now their bicycles and everything are bringing in those goat heads and stuff like that that are in their tires. Root fungus or spread on stumps. For example, why do we borax stumps, right, after we cut the tree in an effort to prevent the root rot, the root fungus from spreading. A human activity, recreation and wood gathering. There's a short-term increase in fire behavior and possible soil erosion. So these are the activities that can happen with activity fuel. It's just not the fuel itself, but it does create other activities. That's what I had for you in the reference to ag learning.
Oh, you're not even was it there?
So that's kind of that's the end of my presentation. You should probably shut the camera off.